Okay, so welcome all of you for today's lecture, which is the penultimate lecture in our series devoted to early Christian thought and the Middle Ages and the concept of tyranny and concept of freedom. And today our guest is Dr. Loïc Chollet. Is that a correct way to pronounce your name? Yeah, and so he received his PhD from the University of Neuchâtel, and he's currently also academically associated with this university, Museum of Saint-Imier. Is that correct?
Yes.
Of the University of Neuchâtel, and Dr. Chollet wrote his PhD on the crusades in the Baltic region in the northern part of Central Eastern Europe in the 12th to 15th century. And he's also an author of scholarly articles devoted to this topic. So today we are going to listen him speak about the Council at Constance and the discussion over the legitimacy or illegitimacy of the Crusades of Teutonic Knights conducted in the Baltic region and northern Poland, Lithuania, as it was later called. So, Loïc, the floor is yours. Yeah, I can see you sharing your screen. So we can see your screen and we can hear you. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mateusz, for this very kind and honorful presentation. And thank you very much also for the invitation. This is a huge honor for me. And I would like to welcome and to thank everybody who is listening to us this evening. On the 15th of July 1410, the Polish and Lithuanian forces defeated the Teutonic Order and their guests from Western Europe at the Battle of Grunwald, Żalgiris in Lithuanian and Tannenberg in German and in modern Western languages as well. During this battle, a military order aimed to expand Christianity in Northeast Europe was crushed by a coalition of Catholic Poles, newly baptized Lithuanians, Muslim Tatars, pagan Samogitians, and Orthodox Ruthenians. This event has been noted by chroniclers all around the continent, from Switzerland to France and England. 4 years later, the Teutonic, Lithuanian, and Polish deputies met at the Council of Constance, where they tried to get the support of the prelates and princes who came at this council from all of the Catholic world and even beyond. The controversy, including discussions on the rights of unbelievers, political freedom, and the legitimacy of crusading, is reflected in the contemporary sources. While the Grand Master Procurator asked for a new crusade, the Polish and Lithuanian delegates claimed that the military power shouldn't be used to expand the Christian faith, and that the use of violence by the Teutonic Knights does not reflect any religious zeal, but, on the contrary, shows its hypocrisy and its greed. Nowadays, historians tend to treat the Polish-Teutonic disputes at the Council of Constance as an important step to later discussions on the international law and religious as well as political freedom. The main figure in this regard is the Polish lawyer Pawel Wlodkowic, the key figure in this ideological fight. His arguments seem to be rooted in the same ground as those used much later by Bartolomeus de las Casas and Francesco de Vitoria, the famous defenders of American natives at the beginning of the 16th century. Although the direct impact of Wlodkowic on the Spanish authors is still debated among scholars, it may be relevant to set the Constance dispute in its historical context and to see whether the Polish arguments reflect a broader criticism of Crusaders' violence. Behind the legal and theological heritage used by Wlodkowic to build up his arguments, a few voices expressed a criticism against the Crusades elsewhere in Europe. While the legal aspects of Wlodkowic's ideas have been well studied, we will concentrate tonight on his view on the Crusades and compare it with those of other thinkers from Central and the late Middle Ages. Then we will see how the ideas of Pawel Wlodkowic differ from those of his contemporaries. We should thus begin with reviewing the perception of the Baltic Crusades in Western Europe until the Battle of Grunwald, and then we will concentrate on the criticism against what may be called chivalric crusading. This will lead us to see that Wlodkowic's ideas wasn't so isolated, but the context was different. The goal of Wlodkowic wasn't to moralize the chivalry, as for the most of his counterparts, but to defend the rights of his kingdom in a specific legal controversy. Since the mid-12th century, a crusade was directed against the pagan tribes living in the Baltic realm for the purpose of defending and expanding the Christian faith. The so-called Baltic Crusade was often regarded in Catholic Europe as a derivative to the Crusade to the Holy Land, which was made impossible after the fall of Acre in 1291. We should thus begin with explaining how this Northern Crusade was perceived in Western Europe. The launching of the First Crusade to the Holy Land in 1095 had an impact on the process of Christianization in the Baltic region. While the local rivalries often turned to wars at a limited scale, the attempts by Catholic powers to conquest the pagan lands became more and more justified by the rhetoric of holy war. In 1147, the French abbot Bernard de Clairvaux encountered the reticence of several German barons when he preached the Second Crusade in Frankfurt. His interlocutors agreed to fight for Christ and to receive indulgences, but not in the Holy Land. They wanted to go near the Baltic Sea against the local pagans. Bernard agreed, and soon after he persuaded Pope Eugenius III to publish the bull Divini Dispensione, which gave a similar status to the Crusaders fighting in the Baltic as in the Middle East. The war against paganism should go on until, with the aid of God, the religion of the pagans or their nation are destroyed. Forced conversion was officially forbidden by the canon law, but one had to understand that military power must be used to make impossible any kind of resistance to missionary activities. The Christianization of the Baltic Rim accelerated with the settlement of the military orders. The military religious congregations that developed during the Crusades, the most famous example being the Templars. The first settlements of a military order in the Baltic region occurred in Livonia. This is present-day southern Latvia and northern Estonia, around 1200, and 2 decades later, in Prussia, so modern-day northern Poland and the Kaliningrad region. The Teutonic Knights, a chivalric militia treated in the Holy Land, had been invited in Prussia to protect the frontiers of Mazovia, a duchy situated in northeastern Poland, not far from the Baltic Sea. The eastern neighbors of the Mazovians were the Prussians, a pagan Baltic people. As Duke Conrad of Mazovia was seeking for protection against his pagan neighbors, he asked the help of the Teutonic Grandmaster Hermann von Salza. Conrad agreed that all the territories that would be taken from the pagans would belong to the Teutonic Order. Grandmaster von Salza had this privilege confirmed by the Pope and by the Emperor, the two supreme powers in the medieval Europe. As you may imagine, the arrival of the Teutonic Knights in Prussia around 1225 did not bring peace to the region. A first wave of conquest was succeeded by almost 1 century of revolts, followed by harsh repression. The violence of the process was mentioned by the English theologian Roger Bacon, who pleaded in his work for a peaceful mission toward the unbelievers. While in his view the non-Christians should be converted by words and not by swords, he used the Teutonic Order as a perfect counter-example. Bacon described Prussia in his Opus Maius. For him, there is no doubt that all the infidel nations beyond Germany would have been converted for a long time if there had been no violence by the brethren of the Teutonic Order, because the people of the pagans were often ready to receive the faith in peace after hearing the predication. But those of the Teutonic Order do not want to refrain, because they want to submit them and to turn them into servitude. Bacon's view may at some points be close to the doctrine developed by Pope Innocent IV, who died in the middle of the 13th century, and who was not only a pope, but also a distinguished canonist. Innocent said that the non-Christians had the right to have states, that their rulers should be recognized as legitimate, and that the Christian powers had to respect them. Also, Innocent also listed several exceptions, which allowed the Catholic powers to interfere, even by force, inside the non-Christian states. After the definitive conquest of Prussia and Livonia by the Teutonic Knights, the crusade in the Baltic region took another direction. The storming of Acre in 1291 meant that no campaign in the Holy Land was possible anymore. Nevertheless, the chivalric ethos in Europe still reclaimed the participation to crusading activities. Noblemen from Western Europe were supposed to journey far away and to fight the Saracens, this word meaning both the Muslims and the pagans. Prussia soon became a choice destination for knights and squires in search of a holy war. During the 14th century, many warriors from Western Europe joined the Teutonic Knights during a campaign against the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, a huge country stretching from the Baltic coast to present-day Ukraine, and where Orthodox, Christians, and pagans lived together under the rule of a pagan dynasty. These campaigns were called the Rise de Prusse, or Prussian Rise, named after the German word Reise, meaning journey or military expedition. Several testimonies indicate that this kind of northern crusade was seen as a means to expand the Catholic faith, but also to defend Christendom from the attacks by the pagans. However, the main motivation for many knights who took part in it was to seek honor according to the chivalric way of life. Everything changed in 1386 when Duke Jogaila of Lithuania got baptized, married Queen Jadwiga of Poland, and became the king of his country. He is known in Poland as Władysław Jagiello. 1 year later, he proclaimed the Catholic faith in Lithuania, although Samogitia was left alone. This coastal province that you can see on the map was disputed at the time between the Teutonic Order and Lithuania, and it was not included in the Diocese of Lithuania, so it remained officially pagan until 1417. Although a few texts, both narratives and diplomatic letters, prove that the baptism of Lithuania has been known in Western Europe, the perception of the Lithuanians as pagans remained quite common. Many crusaders from France and England still supported the Teutonic Order against Lithuania in the 1390s. Several knights from Western Europe got engaged on the other side at the Battle of Grunwald in 1410, which ended by a heavy defeat for the Teutonic Knights. Grandmaster Ulrich von Jungingen got killed with many officers and knights of the Teutonic Order. The newly elected Grandmaster Heinrich von Plauen sent letters and delegates to the European court after the battle. The fact that the Polish and the Lithuanian troops used allies formed by Muslim Tatars, Orthodox Ruthenians, and pagan Samogitian troops was emphasized by the Teutonic Order. The letter sent in Western Europe by the Grandmaster described the battle as a blow inflicted on all of Christendom by an alliance of pagans, Tatars, and wrong Christians, traitors to the Catholic faith. Consequently, Grandmaster von Plauen asked for military support from Western Europe. However, only a few volunteers answered his call. One of these volunteers was Gilbert de Lannoy, who joined a military campaign led by the Lords of Prussia against the Unbelievers. But once in Prussia, he chooses to travel through all the northeastern part of Europe. In his travel account, he described the lands he passed through, mentioning the customs and the inhabitants. The most prominent of these customs in the Baltic region is probably the funeral pyre of the Kuronians, a Baltic people living in the province of Kuronia in Livonia, so in modern Latvia, which was at the time administered by the Teutonic Order since the 13th century. Although they are native Christians for force, the Kuronians have a doctrine that after the death, instead of receiving a proper burial, they are burned in fire made of oak wood, and they believe that if the smoke goes straight to the sky, the soul is saved, but if it is blown laterally, the soul is lost. So this depiction of a funeral pyre is obviously an element of pagan origin. Of course, it's always very difficult to interpret such a testimony, but it seems to reflect at least a syncretism between pagan and the Christian elements. Furthermore, when Gilbert crossed Lithuania, he mentioned that the people of the same kingdom, so Lithuania, are recently born Christians under duress of the Lords of Prussia and Livonia. Gilbert refrains to condemn the Teutonic brethren for having used force to convert the Truonians and the Lithuanians, although this practice of forced conversion was, of course, forbidden by the canon law. His attitude is close to what we can read in Philippe de Mézières' Songe du Vieil Pèlerin, which contains a depiction of Prussia. Mézières, one of the most influent writers of the French late Middle Ages, wrote that the Teutonic Knights are perfect Christian warriors, but that the native Prussians are still partly pagans, although being, according to Philippe de Mézières, newcomers in the faith. For Mézières, as for Lanois, the Knights of the Teutonic Order are praised as valuable warriors, but they seem to be poor missionaries. Should one understand that all of Western Europe backed the Teutonic Order, a quick look for the most part of the text from the late 14th century would lead us to answer yes, but several voices show a very different tone. For example, the Austrian poet Heinrich der Teichner categorized the Reise as wasting and the lose of time. For him, the duty of a lord is not to go far away and to harass the pagans, but it is to administer its own fief at home, to punish crimes, to render justice, and to defend his own land against the aggressions of the neighbors, which are obviously Catholic, at least for his Austrian public. Moreover, Heinrich wrote that he personally heard that some knights went to Prussia not to fight for God, but to meet other women. The English poet John Gower writes that violence shouldn't be used to spread the Christian faith, but that going to Prussia or elsewhere in seek for worldly honor is pleasant to God. Interestingly enough, he said that some crusaders engaged in a faraway campaign in Prussia or elsewhere for winning the love of a lady, a point also mentioned by Geoffrey Chaucer and by a few French writers. So you understood, it seems that crusading was not only about religious zeal. Philippe de Mézières, one of the first authors who mentioned the baptism of Lithuania, shows all the ambiguity concerning the Crusades in the late Middle Ages. On the one hand, he uses the Teutonic Knights as models for the military religious order that he wanted to create, called the Order of the Passion of Jesus Christ. But on the other hand, he did not spare his words to shame the lay knights who took part in the Prussian Reise and other worldly crusades. Philippe's most famous work is the Songe du Vieil Pèlerin, so the Dream of the Old Pilgrim in English, finished in 1389. The first part of the book is an imaginary depiction of the world with many examples and counter-examples aiming to indicate to the French king and nobility what they should do and what they should not do. Prussia is, in this regard, one of the best countries according to Philippe. The Teutonic Knights are explicitly quoted as models for the Christian chivalry. But, on the contrary, the aristocratic laymen who took part in the Order's Reise are harshly criticized in another of Mézières' work, written in 1396. Philip attacks the habit of crusading as he saw it within the nobility of his time. There are some knights, especially in the kingdoms of France, England, Germany, and Scotland, more than in other countries, who, for the sake of gaining bravery and worldly prowess, under the disguise of devotion, undertake journeys to Prussia, Grenada, Barbary, Turkey, Hungary, Serbia, or Wallachia. Each time that a renowned knight from one of the above-said kingdoms undertakes such a journey by his own will and without having a fully formed idea what he's doing, the others follow him even less wisely, like a sheep following another. So you can see that he's very harsh in his words against the late crusaders. Mézières adds that such crusaders do not care for military efficiency, but only for enhancing their own worldly honor. We know such expeditions are thus inefficient and even harmful for the cause of Christianity, because the unbelievers would retaliate against the local Christians as a revenge. Philip sees only a few causes that should be considered as legitimate targets for crusading. This is the taking or the retaking, the reconquest of the Holy Land, and the defense of the Christian countries. So, after having seen the perceptions of the Baltic Crusade and the criticism of crusading in the late Middle Ages, let's turn to Pawel Wlodkowic and his arguments during the trial at the Council of Constance. Born near 3070 in the land of Dobrzin, Wlodkowic studied canon law in Prague and in Padua. Pawel was the student of Cardinal Francesco Zabarella, one of the chief intellectuals of his time and later one of the leaders of the Council of Constance. Once in Italy, Pawel may have drawn the attention of the conciliar Pope Alexander V to the issue of Samogitia, this land that was still pagan at the time and disputed between the Teutonic Order and Lithuania. Back in Poland, Pawel became the rector of the University of Krakow in 1414 and 1415. Bearing this prestigious title, he took part in the Polish delegation sent to the Council of Constance with a mission to defend King Jagiellon against the Teutonic Knights. Although Pawel was not the head of the delegation, his role in the trial between the Teutonic and Polish delegates earned him a certain notoriety. Concerning his doctrine, he mostly drew on canon law, especially on Pope Innocent IV, Thomas de Aquino, and other authorities, not to forget Zabarella's teaching. Furthermore, Pawel used history and natural law. He also developed the ideas expressed by his compatriot Stanisław ze Skarbimierza in his De Bellis Justice, a sermon written after the Polish victory at Grunwald. As the title reflects it, Stanisław's goal was to counter the Teutonic Knights' accusation and to show that the Polish king fought a just war. One of the first speeches delivered by Pawel Wlodkowic at the Council of Constance is Tractatus de potestate papae et imperatoris respectu infidelium, during the summer of 1416. In this discourse, Wlodkowic claims that the Teutonic Order had no legitimacy to attack the Lithuanians just for being pagans. Harassing peaceful unbelievers is contrary to the Jus Gentium, according to authorities such as Pope Innocent IV and Cardinal Zabarella, Wlodkowic's former master, and one of the key figures of the Council. The Polish lawyer uses history to show that the conquest of Prussia was based on righteous grounds, as the first fighter from the Teutonic Order defended Duke Conrad against aggressive pagans. But their successor soon became Lord of Prussia, according to his words, and with their wealth also grew their power and their pride. Seeking more and more territories, they called for the help of the Christian nations and they attacked the Lithuanians, described in Pawel Wlodkowic's treatise as peaceful. Historical reality is not so simple as you may imagine. The Horizon, these huge expeditions organized twice a year with the help of the Brest from Western Europe, are an example illustrating the misdeeds of the Teutonic Order. Yet these Crucifers, or the Teutonic Knights, have not ceased to attack even peaceful and quiet infidels, and to invade their lands and dominions, on the first pretext, as if pagan fury was still raging against the believers in Christ. They summon Christians to help, and they make it a rule to invade the lands of infidels with a strong army twice a year. They call it in their vulgar tongue Raisin, or Reza in the Latin original. To falsely disguise this pious work, the Raisin, he adds, lead to the damnation of all the actors involved. And thus is turned into a custom, the error that the faithful of Christ, believing that by military service they do homage to God, flock there in great numbers, and on the pretext of spreading the Catholic faith, a quiet people of infidels is being cruelly attacked. Hence follow homicides. The faithful are exposed to the same danger of damnation as the infidels. Robberies and endless other unspeakable things are perpetrated. As the French historian Jacques Chiffolot has shown, the mention of deeds that are so horrific that they cannot be spoken is often used to categorize villains or heretics. So the public is supposed to understand that the Teutonic Order belonged to one of these doomed categories. So far, Wlodkowic looks quite close to Philippe de Mézières or Heinrich der Teichner, although he does not attack the crusade for being vainglory, but he attacks the legitimacy of the war. The Polish scholars' depiction of Lithuania and its conversion to Christianity shed light to his approach. If a war against the pagan Lithuanians was already unjust, because the Lithuanians are supposed to have been peaceful, the situation became worse when Duke Jagiello converted and has been crowned King of Poland. The subsequent baptism of Lithuania made the Teutonic Knights furious. The Crucifers ponder upon these miraculous happenings, and as if pained that there has been lost for them the occasion of seizing the possessions and dominions of the Lithuanians, they invade with greater ferocity the said neophytes many times, again and again, in their usual way, and they kill truly both priests and also many others, both those already baptized and those not baptized. They burned their quite new churches, and they commit numberless other things which the tendency bids one remain silent about. So still, again, this kind of rhetoric that the Teutonic Knights are behaving so badly that it's better not to speak about what they are actually doing. So, Pawel Wlodkowic does not target the idea of crusading in itself, but the fact that the crusade accomplished by the Teutonic Knights is not a righteous one. Like Philippe de Mézières, he accepts the crusade as a means to fight for the Holy Land, to recover the lands once held by Christians, such, for example, as southern Spain, and to defend the Christian countries. Such a view was more or less traditional when one discussed the possibilities of fighting a just war against unbelievers. Furthermore, Pawel must have been aware that his king potentially needed to organize his own crusade against the neighboring Tatars or Russians. As we have seen, Pawel used history to show the alleged misdeeds of the Teutonic Knights. But what are the legal grounds that would make the Teutonic Order sections illegitimate? The Teutonic Knights based their arguments on the tradition of the Baltic Crusade and on the privileges granted to them in the 13th century by the Pope and by the Emperor. firmly rooted in Prussia. They claimed to have the right to possess this land and any other that they would take from the pagans. Thus, Wlodkowic intended to demonstrate that neither the Pope nor the Emperor had the right to give away a land belonging to the infidels. Hence the title of the treaty, Tractatus de potestate papae et imperatoris respectus infidelium, so about the power of the Pope and of the Emperor concerning the infidels. First, the power of the Emperor over the Balts would be achieved only by violence and tyranny, as the pagan did not agree to recognize the imperial authority. The conclusion regarding the privilege claimed by the Teutonic Knights is clear, because according to Wlodkowic, the emperor does not have to give permission to occupy the lands of infidels who do not recognize his empire. Secondly, Wlodkowic admits that the Pope have a universal power, but this power is limited. The Pope's temporal role is to look after the good of every human being, including the non-Christians. All, in fact, both the faithful and the unfaithful are Christian by virtue of creation, even if they are not part of the church flock. Even the Pope must respect the rights of infidels. A sovereign, therefore, commits a sin if he strips them of a good without reason, and even the Pope must not seize their possessions. The papal privilege granted to the Teutonic Knights is thus without any value. Wlodkowic quotes Innocent IV, according to whom the infidels can have their own states, which must be respected in the same way as the Christian states. Subsequently, Innocent says that possession, ownership, and jurisdiction can exist licitly without sin among the infidels, because these institutions were not made only for the faithful, but for every creature endowed with reason. From this it is deduced, according to Innocent, that it is not permitted to take away from infidels their property, possessions, or jurisdiction, because they possess it without sin and thanks to God. The idea is that the infidels have the right to possess their own land and that it is lawful and that it is lawful to invade them because they would have no right to possess their own lands is thus refuted. And this brings us to the question of just war. I will pass just this slide. Or maybe excuse me, as I got a bit confused. As you heard it, English is not my mother language, so I just have to go a few slides away. So, in speaking after Innocent IV, Pawel places himself in a prestigious legal tradition, but an influential opinion, which went in the very opposite direction, has been formulated in the 13th century by Cardinal Henry of Cebuzo, known as Hostiensis. This prominent jurist accepted the use of force in the enterprise of evangelization and denied any legitimacy to the non-Christian states. Wlodkowic vigorously attacks this opinion. From such an opinion, much absurdity follows, namely that Christians could without sin steal, rob, snatch, occupy and invade the goods and lands of infidels who do not recognize the church or its power, even if these infidels wanted to coexist peacefully with us. This opinion appears to be full of danger. Indeed, it gives permission to be unjust to one's neighbor, and it offers an easy opportunity for a great number of homicides. This is why it is generally not followed. The idea that the infidels have no right to possess their own lands and that it is lawful to invade them is refuted. This brings us to the question of just war. We have seen that after the Battle of Grunwald, the Teutonic Knights hence sent envoys and letters to the European courts, stating that the Poles treacherously allied themselves with pagans and other unbelievers. The order was presented as the bulwark of Christendom, threatened by a coalition of aggressive infidels and traitors to the Catholic faith. Such a statement has been repeated in front of the council by the procurator of the Grand Master in early 1415. To counter such arguments, Wlodkowic must prove that it is not a sin to get allies among non-Christian peoples. Quoting the examples of the Maccabees, who allied themselves with the pagan Romans, the Krakow scholar demonstrates that it was legitimate for a Christian ruler attacked by co-religionists to ask for the help of infidels, an opinion that was also defended by other canonists, such as Giovanni de Andrea from Italy, who died in the mid-14th century. As all states, even the states of the non-Christians, have the right to exist, the law is war is more or less the same for all. The crucial point for Wlodkowic is therefore the justice of the war and not the religion of the belligerents. To determine whether a war is just or not, he takes up the 5 criteria of Raymond de Peñafort, which became classics in the later Middle Ages. So the person only lay people can fight, the purpose only to defend themselves or to recover stolen lands, the cause, war must be a necessary mean to restore peace, the state of mind, you must not wage war for plunder or by hatred, and the legality, the authorization must be given by the church. Thus, to wage war on the sole purpose of converting non-Christian people is forbidden. Natural law is opposed to this, obviously by do unto others as you would have them do unto you, as at the beginning of the decrees. Divine law is opposed, obviously, by thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal. In the expression thou shalt not kill, all violence is forbidden. Indeed, the most part of the medieval jurists and theologians forbid the use of coercion in evangelizing the unbelievers. The main IG presented in De Potestate allows us to see the basis on which Pawel Wlodkowic criticizes the politics and the ideology of the Teutonic Order. First, the right of pagan states to exist, to defend themselves and to help Christian neighbors who would fight a just war. 2. The illegal character of privileges granted by the Pope and by the Emperor on the lands that do not belong to them. And 3. The illegality of waging war for spreading the Christian faith. The reflection on the just war had a double purpose. First, to argue that the Teutonic Order's assaults against Lithuania and Poland are unjust, and secondly, that the counter-attack waged by these two countries is rightful. Consequently, the Teutonic Order is described in Pawel Wlodkowic's treatise as a war of aggression, falsely disguised as a crusade. The subsequent speeches that he delivers in front of the council develop the idea of the Teutonic Knights as fake crusaders. In Causa inter reges Poloniae et Cruciferos, in autumn 1416, he attacked not only the order's deeds, but its doctrine, such as reflected in Certas Literas et Articulos, used by the Grand Master's delegates during an arbitrage at Buda in front of King Sigismund a few years earlier. These documents are said to be imperial and papal privileges from the 13th century. And the idea of Wlodkowic is to show that the contents of these documents underlies the erroneous ideas that the Teutonic Knights exert themselves in spreading the cult of the Catholic faith. Thus, to say, as these men say, that the glorious order has been instituted for the sake of exterminating the infidels and to take their worldly goods means that their order is founded on deliberate murder, robbery, and theft. This is not a minor offense to pious ears. And it cannot be denied that this sect is an error and that it should not be tolerated in the Church of God. A few lines later, the Teutonic Order is accused of promoting a dangerous heresy. Because this order contains an error opposed to the faith, which, according to the apostle, operates by charity, while this order includes violence and theft, sedition, and murder, who will doubt that this order contains a true heresy contrary to the faith? Wlodkowic goes on with a quotation for the Bible, often used to describe the heretics. Beware of the false prophets, who go to you dressed as sheep, while under their disguise they are ravenous wolves. In consequence, the Teutonic Order should be judged, and if convicted of heresy, it should be dismantled. Its members should resign and enter other religious communities. The European power should stop helping the order in any way, both military, economically, financially, and its Prussian as well as Livonian subjects should stop obeying to the Grand Master's command. As Wlodkowic puts it, if a ruler begins to act contrary to the law, the subjects are not bound to obedience anymore. These arguments will be used in a later context, at the beginning of the 13th Years' War, when the Prussian towns and lay nobility will rise up against the order and join the Polish royal forces. When compared to other authors, such as Philippe de Mézières or Heinrich der Teichner, who mainly attacked the late Crusaders' seek for worldly honor, Pawel Wlodkowic's criticism is different. He affirms that the so-called Prussian heresy is widespread in Europe, which can be seen by the fact that there has been flocking to aid them the armed knighthood from almost all Christian parts, from Italy, from France, England, Germany. However, the guilty party is not the foreign crusades, the foreign crusaders from Western Europe, but it is the order itself. In an allusion to the Battle of Grunwald, Wlodkowic says that the fallen West have been lured by the Grand Master Król and his promise to lay out the famous Table of Honor, a tradition celebrating the heroism of the Order's West, who, if we compare to other authors, for example, Philippe de Mézières, Pawel Wlodkowic does not condemn the Baltic treason as vainglory, but as an aggressive and unjust, illegal war. The accusation that he threw at the face of the Teutonic Order came to nothing, as the newly elected Pope Martin V did not want to choose between the competitive Baltic powers. So the Teutonic Order have never been tried for heresy. But nonetheless, the delegates from the Kingdom of Denmark cautiously copied the ideas of the Krakow master. The King of Denmark had a very tense relationship with the Teutonic Knights, almost at war, and it may have been relevant for the Danish deputies to collect any arguments potentially used against the military religious order. So if the Pole did it, the Danes may did it as well. More than the arguments of the lawyer Pawel Wlodkowic, the council may have been impressed by a delegation of Samogitian elders who went to Constance and asked for their land to be baptized, not by the Teutonic Knights, but by Poland and Lithuania. The baptism of Samogitia, confirmed by the council in 1417, put an end to the Baltic Crusade. The Council of Constance, an international forum gathering many prelates, lords, and ambassadors from all of Europe, publicly backed the Christianization of Samogitia by Poland and Lithuania. Thus, it became clear that there was no more pagans to fight in the Baltic era. As the news progressively spread all across Europe, the nobility understood that there was no more glory nor honor to win in waging war against the Balts, who were now fellow Christians. King Jagiellon and his cousin Witold of Lithuania successfully demonstrated their political power and their will to expand Catholic faith in Eastern Europe, not by coercion, but allegedly by persuasion. Several actions were intended by the Polish and Lithuanian rulers to bring the Orthodox Ruthenians into the obedience of the Catholic Church. The ecclesiastical as well as the lay powers gathered in Constance got convinced that Poland and Lithuania represented important countries one has to deal with. So the arguments of Pawel Wlodkowic against the Teutonic Order's crusade were, so to say, one part of a broader political game. But they are still very interesting to discuss for those studying the history of political thought. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you for your lecture. Okay, can you stop sharing the screen?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So if anyone has a question, you can raise your hand or just turn on your microphone, or you can ask a question via chat if you have access to chat, because I'm not sure if everyone has access to chat box. Yes, well, maybe I will start with a remark, because we started the series with Saint Augustine, which was 1,000 years before that, and it's very interesting how the thinking changed, because at one point you mentioned the discussion whether pagan states can legitimately exist, right? Or
yes,
can pagans possess any material goods? So, of course, the Saint Augustine's view was that the state and possession and all of this is a result of sin, right? So that there was no according to Augustine, there were no political institutions in the state of innocence. He famously said that, humans were not created to rule over other humans, only over irrational animals and so on. So for Augustine, the state itself was the punishment for sin and remedy for sin and so on. So this argument that that the state is not something natural, of course, was used, as you said, against the legitimacy of pagan states.
Mhm.
But already in the period that you were describing, of course, the reception of Aristotle was very profound. And since the translation of politics of Aristotle in late 13th century, people started to develop more Aristotelian views according to which states are natural, so possession is natural, political institutions are natural, and you can see that the argument of Wlodkowic and other jurists, it was Aristotelian in the sense that that both the states are natural and so the possession of material goods and all the institutions and law, it's something natural. So that's interesting to see how long, I mean, how far from Augustine the discussion was at this period already.
Yes, yes, it is very interesting to make such a comparison, especially for me, who is more a specialist of the late Middle Ages. And I think that you are right. The influence of Aristotle is very important, and this is also one historical element which explains that Pope Innocent IV was concerned about the legitimacy not only of Christian states but of pagan states. And this historical element was the confrontation with the Mongols, because the Mongols were, of course, non-Christians, but they were also very strong politically and military speaking. So one had to deal with them. And it probably was an influence on Innocent, because Innocent wanted to have political relationship with the Mongol states. So he had to consider the state as legitimate.
Yes, but that's even more interesting, because Innocent, it's like 1240s, right? Something like that. So it's before the translation of Aristotle's Politics, which was in 1260s. So this is the other line of development, I would say. So the canon law and the jurists in general, because as you said, Innocent IV, like many popes in the 13th century, he was a lawyer.
Yes.
So it's interesting that the jurists, like the decretalists, and the jurists of especially the 14th century, they developed the idea of the natural rights and the limitation of power, not from Aristotle, but from their reflection on the Roman and canon law, right? So I think those are two sources, so to speak. So one is Aristotle with his idea of the limitation of political power, the natural political condition of humans. But on the other hand, the lawyers, the jurists, they used their legal science for instance, to claim that the ruler has to be accepted by the ruled, right? So this is the legal concept.
Yes. Yes, this is a very interesting reflection.
Yeah, because Wlodkowic, as far as I know, he studied in Prague, right, and also in Padua,
Yes,
in
yes,
Italy. So he had a lot of contacts with the jurists of Italy, and
yes.
so it must have influenced him. I think more than Aristotle, maybe the jurist tradition, the canon law and the Roman law, because as you said, he argues on the basis of Innocent IV and
Mhm.
and the law rather. I
Yes.
mean, maybe I don't know the text in full, so I don't know if he makes any references to Aristotle or political philosophy or Thomas Aquinas or anything like that, or he just sticks to the legal arguments.
In fact, as far as I remember, he quotes a few times Thomas de Aquino, but the most part of his arguments are based on law tradition, and especially on Innocent IV, Giovanni de Andrea, who was also an Italian jurist, and his former master, Francesco Zabarella, which was quite a good idea, politically speaking, because Zabarella was still alive during the time of the Council of Constance, and he was one of the leader of the council. So Wlodkowic was quite in a comfortable position in this regard.
And do we have any I mean, any connections or any knowledge about Wlodkowic's relation to Jean Gerson, of Paris? Because Gerson also developed his own view of the rights of the individuals, and so he was also working within this jurist tradition at a similar period, the beginning of the 15th century.
Yes, yes. We had an example of a connection between the two intellectuals, because at the end of the council, Pawel Wlodkowic and his fellow delegates from the Kingdom of Poland tried to have the other tried for heresy. And they, it seems that they, in one of the last session of the council, they made noise and they quite physically stand up and shout, we want the other to be tried in another council. If we have not time to do it right now, it should be done, but later. And Jean Gerson noted this episode in one of his numerous work, because he was also interested in the idea of tyranny and tyrannicide. But the question was not really about the Teutonic Order in itself, but about one of the order's propagandists called Johannes Falkenberg, who wrote a very violent text claiming that the King of Poland, Władysław Jagiełło, was an evil tyrant, and that the duty of the Christians was to kill him and to crush the Polish nobility. So, of course, for Wlodkowic, this text had to be banned, and he wanted Johannes Falkenberg, he's the author of this text, to be tried for heresy. And it is this episode that interested Jean Gerson, because in the Kingdom of France, we had a very close affair of tyrannicide, namely a text written by a French propagandist, Jean Petit, who wanted to defend the Duke of Burgundy, who attacked and killed the Duke of Orléans. So civil political war inside the French kingdom. But what was interesting for Jean Gerson is that he wanted Jean Petit, the author of the text known in French as La Justification du Duc de Bourgogne, Justification of the Duke of Burgundy. He wanted this text to be banned and condemned as heretic. So when he heard that the Polish delegates also requested that text accusing a ruler to be a tyrant and justifying or calling for the murder of his tyrant, Gerson noted the arguments. It's like the Danish delegates who noted the arguments of Pawel Wlodkowic. Oh, this looks interesting. These arguments may serve our own cause as well. So this is the connection between the two intellectuals.
Okay, interesting. And I also I found it interesting what you said about the later period, the 13th century war between the Kingdom of Poland and the Teutonic Order, because you said that the cities in Prussia sort of rebelled against the knights,
Yes.
and they joined the king, but I'm not sure. I don't remember if the cities justified it by recurring to the law, to the juristic theories, or it was later justified by the jurists. But this is a very interesting case, because in the 12th and the 13th and the 14th century, as far as I know, there was a lot of discussion about the legality of deposing a tyrant, or even killing a tyrant, or even deposing a pope, right? So that there was this whole discussion what to do if the pope is a heretic. But all those discussions, they were very theoretical. For instance, I don't remember who was it. It was one of the 14th century jurists, maybe like Bartolomeo de Sassoferrata or someone like that, who said that let's imagine that the Pope is a heretic and he is having sex with a prostitute on the altar during the Mass. Can we depose him? So those were very strange legal cases beyond any doubt, but it was a very intellectual exercise. So I don't remember any particular cases where when people in late Middle Ages really applied those principles, saying we disobey this particular prince or king because he is a tyrant, he disregards the law, he disregards our rights. I don't know enough about this period, but from what I know, those were very theoretical discussions, because in practical life, it wasn't common for people to just depose their kings on the basis of the accusation of tyranny. But here you have such a case, so that the cities disobeyed the knights on the ground that they were, you know, acting against natural law, something like that, right?
Yes, this is really interesting. And in fact, to answer to your second question, we have a few cases of vassals disobeying a ruler for accusing them of being a heretic. This happened mostly, as far as I know, during the very violent war between Emperor Frederick II and the popes, including Pope Innocent IV. And it seems that the propagandists, both of the emperor and those of the pope, accused the rival to be a tyrant, to be more or less a heretic, and that they should be whipped away from the power, and that the subjects of the vassals had to rebel. So this happened at this occasion, and it happened also, for example, in the Kingdom of France, where King Philip IV kind of rebelled against the Pope, and he accused Pope Bonifacio VIII to be a heretic. And he said that he had to go away and he should be tried of heresy, and if convicted, he should be swept away from the throne of St. Peter. So we had a few examples, but of course, the tensions.
Yes, but this is interesting because, so sorry for interrupting, but yes, because this is all in the context of the conflict between papacy and Roman Empire, or papacy, yes, and secular state. So this is, you're right. In this context, we have a lot of this. I mean, every time a pope was waging a war with the Roman emperor, mm-hmm, they were both accusing themselves of being heretics and of being illegitimate rulers. But I think it's a special situation, this conflict between the secular power and the ecclesiastical power. But yes, do you think the conflict with the Teutonic orders is also this kind of conflict between the religious authority and the secular authority?
I am not quite sure about the 13 Years' War, but if we look to the ideas of Pawel Wlodkowic, Stanisław de Skarbimierza, and other Polish thinkers during the beginning of the 15th century, it seems that they do not attack the religious power of the Teutonic Order, but more its secular, and they attack them for being too secular, for being more knights than monks, so to say. So I think that the situation of the Teutonic Order became more and more, let's say, lay during the 15th century, because they were not seen as a crusading order anymore, but more or less as an aristocratic order. And I think that the political agreements in the cities which rebelled against the Teutonic Order are also elements of what we could say Prussian proto-nationalism, in the way that the people who were from Prussian, were born in Prussia, considered themselves as the real master of his lands, and that the Teutonic Knights were more or less a foreign power, because the knights were not born in the Baltic region, but in Germany.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and as far as I understood your argument, so the main point that Wlodkowic made was that, I mean, he didn't criticize the idea of crusades. He didn't criticize the legitimacy of crusading, but he just argued that this is not an authentic crusade, right? So
Yes.
so he made the point that they usurp the power that they shouldn't have, right? So they are just basically they are just secular knights who pretend to be crusaders, but they don't care about converting and things like that. So he took a different approach. He didn't try to question the validity of the Holy War or anything like that.
Yes, yes, and in fact, in the Middle Ages, there was discussions both by theologians, jurists, and aristocratic people about what should be a crusade and what it should not be. So in this way, Pawel Wlodkowic was quite close to someone as Philippe de Mézières, this French writer that I quoted in my presentation, and who said that a crusade must be a defensive war or aimed at the reconquest of lands that has been already Christian in the past, but have been taken by others.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yes. So that so the argument was that so Prussia was never Christian in the past, so it wasn't
Yes.
the case of reconquering this. Of course, yeah. And I don't know if I remember correctly from your presentation, there was something about protecting missionaries, right? So the idea was that, for instance, military power could be used in Prussia to protect the priests preaching and converting.
Yes, this idea has been repeated during the Baltic Crusade, and in fact, it seems that it can be as old as the Carolingian Empire. Maybe even it may date back from Augustine. So the idea that, of course, forced conversion is forbidden, but you may use force to protect the missionaries. But what do we imagine when one speaks about protecting the missionaries? This may be used also to crush the military resistance of the non-Christian peoples. So we can, in fact, the pagans may be forced to listen to the missionaries. And of course, this is quite almost casuistic rhetoric, because real forced conversion is forbidden, but one may use military power to make conversion, let's say, faster and easier.
Yeah, so of course it's easily abused because you can control a pagan state militarily in order to protect the missionaries, and then of course the pagans are afraid because they can't resist the military force. So it's not literally forced conversion, but it's yeah. So it's a tricky question. Where is the boundary between those two? Yeah. Okay. So That's an interesting question. Okay, so that's that's interesting. How how the specific situation of the Central Eastern Europe gave material for those reflections and discussions, because it was a specific situation, because there were no pagans anywhere else in Europe
Yes.
anymore, right? So this, yeah, I was just, coming to a close. I was just remembering the novel by Henryk Sienkiewicz. About well, I'm not sure. There's not a good way to translate it into English. Maybe crucifers, because this is a very interesting thing. Because Sienkiewicz wrote this novel when the western part of Poland was controlled by the Prussians. So it was a historical novel, but of course, when he was depicting the Teutonic Knights as those horrible, brutal, ruthless figures, he was in a way alluding to the German colonization and oppression of the time. But this is interesting that, for instance, I guess in the Western Europe, because you can say about any crusade that the crusaders were the crucifers. They were wearing the crosses, right? So but in the Polish sort of historical memory, the very word krzyżacy, the crucifers, it contains such violence and injustice that it's strange, because of course Catholicism was so important in Poland, and again the knights wearing crosses were seen as this horrible enemy. So that's a paradox in all this. Yeah.
Yes. I know this very interesting novel, and I have read it when I was a student. In French, it has been translated as Les Chevaliers Teutoniques, so Teutonic Knights.
Yeah, without the reference to the cross at all.
No.
Yeah, but I think it's interesting, because the cross is the symbol of the faith. So and when you read the novel, this term krzyżacy, the crucifers, it's saturated with such violence and hatred. You really, when you read the novel, you really hate those men. But this is a Christian symbol, so I think it's a very interesting case. And of course, from the point of view of the history of the 19th century, so the Germans were presenting themselves as representatives of higher culture.
Yes.
That they were they were civilizing Poles. They were representing greater learning, education, culture. So this was a strange situation, because it's difficult to be in a position when you want to reject civilization, right? No one wants to reject civilization. So when the Germans were saying, okay, we represent Beethoven and Goethe and Hegel and Bach and all those people, so you should submit. But so it takes. I think you need this paradox to reject this as hypocrisy. I think that what Wlodkowic did was already, the argument that you say you are more civilized than us, but this is hypocrisy. You use your civilization to colonize, right? So this is I think another layer of this novel.
Yes, and the fascinating point is that the treatment of the krzyżacy, so the Teutonic Knights in Sienkiewicz, are quite close to the treatments in Wlodkowic discourses. And it may be explained by the fact that the famous Polish chronicler Jan Długosz probably was influenced by Wlodkowic, or at least by general opinion, the royal Polish elite in Krakow, that Teutonic Knights are evil enemies. And I think that Sienkiewicz wrote at least traduction from Długosz, so he may have perceived these negative points also reflected by Wlodkowic. And by the way, Wlodkowic uses the word cruciferi, so krzyżacy, the cross bearer, in his discourse.
Cruciferi, crossbearers. So that's interesting, because I mean, it maybe, it was a kind of irony. They bear the cross, but they don't represent the cross. They represent, murder and violence and robbery and theft and all of that. So yeah, interesting. Okay, thank you very much for this presentation and discussion. Okay, so thank you, and I thank you all who are present for listening this, and the recording will be available on our YouTube channel, so other people can see this as well. So thank you Loïc, again for this lecture, and have a good evening, all of you.
Thank you very much, Mateusz, for such a fascinating discussion, and for the invitation. Thank you also to those listening and that will be listening to this lecture. Thank you, and have a good evening.
Yeah. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.